Phrasal verbs are so common in the English language that it would be impossible to just start with a list and say, let's talk about phrasal verbs. So typically what I like to do is focus them around a topic. In this case, something related to growing up, childhood, being a kid, right, or parenting. So we're going to look at 3 specific phrasal verbs related to being a child and parenting, okay? Now, the weird thing about phrasal verbs is that they have multiple meanings. They don't only have one meaning, and that's what makes them kind of complicated. So when you learn phrasal verbs, make sure you're learning the different meanings that they have, and also be sure to learn by example so that you can get a feeling for them, so that you can learn how to use them naturally. Now we're going to start with grow up, right? And I'm sure that you've heard it before, and the standard meaning is to sort of go from being small to being big, right? So if you looked at a plant, you might say the plant is growing up, right? It's getting bigger and becomes a large plant. So it's growing up. All right. I don't know what's going on there with my plant. But specifically about being a kid, right? You hear phrases about going from being a baby to an adult, and you could say that is growing up. When we talk about a general period in our lives, when we were kids, not yet adults, we say, when I was growing up, when I was growing up. It's a broad description to talk about generally childhood and being a teen, those years. You're talking about an era in your life, a period of time in your life, right? But there are some common phrases related to this that people use that you'll often hear. And one of the most common is, when I grow up. That doesn't mean the period of time when you are growing up. That means when you're done, when the cookies are baked, when you're an adult. And often people talk about potential careers in this way. They'll say, when I grow up, I'd like to be an astronaut. When I grow up, I want to be an architect. Or what do you want to be when you grow up? Parents will often ask their kids that, or adults will ask children that. What do you want to be when you grow up? So it's a common phrase. But this phrasal verb can be used in a lot of different ways. This is more of a physical meaning, or maybe this era or this period of time in your life. This is a common phrase about being done with that period of time and something that will happen or maybe won't happen when that happens. But then there's something about maturity that we talk about with this phrasal verb. Maturity is your ability to handle the world. It's an emotional condition. It's what happens often when people do grow up. So sometimes when you hear someone say just this by itself, grow up, it means you're being immature. Now, you could say this to a 55-year-old if they're being immature, right? If someone is behaving in a way that a child would behave, you feel like they're not behaving in a mature way, then you can say, will you just grow up? You're being so childish. Let's say, for example, somebody wants to buy something that they can't afford, right? Husband and a wife. Husband wants to buy a boat, but they can't afford it. And the husband says, I want a boat. Well, we can't afford it. It's not in our budget. I'm going to get it. Well, we have to go in debt to get it. I want it anyway. Will you grow up? Let's save up a few years, then maybe we can afford to buy it, right? Maybe this lady thinks that her husband is being childish for saying, I want this thing right now. I want a boat right now. Doesn't matter what age then. It's more of the emotional aspect of it. That's what it's really about. And often we're telling someone to do that, right? You need to grow up and stop living in a fantasy. Someone is living in their head. They're not living in the real world. You need to grow up. Again, it's not about your actual age. Sometimes, though, you'll see things like arising, and you'll see things like beginning and then increasing in number, and that being associated with the phrasal verb grow up. So something like local communities have grown up over the years. So they began with 2 or 3 people, and then more people got involved, and maybe it's about farming, or it's about doing black magic, whatever it is. A small group of people has got together. They have started doing something together, and they're local. They live close together, and the community has grown up. That doesn't mean the community has become more mature. It means that it began in a small way and has grown, gotten bigger over time. So that meaning is less common, but you will see that one too. Okay, so that's typically how we use grow up. A grown-up would be an adult. Look at all those grown-ups. Often as a kid, you would describe adults as grown-ups instead of being an adult. Those adults, the grown-ups, the grown-up table. Oh, I feel so grown up. So that could be either a noun or an adjective. What about, and let's actually go over one that's got the same word in it, but is in fact different. Let's talk about grow out of. Now, this kind of breaks the rules of typical phrasal verbs, but let's just say grow out, and then we often add of something after it. Now, you might know the basic meaning. To grow out of something is something that fit you before, but now it doesn't because of something that happened. But that could be used in different ways. Well, a simple example would be clothes. When this is true, by the way, about me, older brother grew out of his clothes, I would get them. What does that mean? Well, that means he's actually growing physically. And I'm also doing that, but I'm younger, so I will fit his old clothes when he's done. He has now new clothes. This is something that always bothered me as a kid, because it makes sense to say, well, now you're big enough to wear your older brother's clothes. Why don't you wear them? I would just have to say, yeah, okay, I guess. I didn't get new clothes as often as my big brother because he was the oldest, so he got the newer clothes most often, and I was often wearing his old clothes because he grew out of them. So think about it physically. You're in a shirt, okay? Here you are in this. It was actually not a bad shirt there. Great job. Great job, Luke. Tiny head. And then you get bigger, and your body is now growing physically. What the heck? Growing out of it. It's just too small. Okay, so you grew out of that. And that's a typical way we describe that. We also talk about these types of clothes as hand-me-downs. Hand-me-down clothes. And you often see this written with hyphens between them. Hand-me-down clothes. Okay, I'm wearing hand-me-downs. Now, we also use this for non-physical things. We talked about maturity, right? Becoming more mature. Well, think about the different phases of your life. Was there a period of time where you liked this as a 13 and 14-year-old, but then as a 15 and 16-year-old, you didn't like it anymore? In the same way that you would grow out of a shirt because you get bigger, you might grow out of a fad or a trend or something that you were into for a period of time. So, or maybe not, right? For example, we might say something like, he never really grew out of Pokemon. Oh, the R. Never really grew out of Pokemon. What does that mean? Well, he got into Pokemon as a 10-year-old. He loved Pokemon as a 10-year-old, trading the cards, right? Playing Pokemon on Game Boy Color. But then, as he got older, he never really stopped being into that. A lot of the time when you are 10, you like things, and then as you get older, you grow out of those things, and you like other things. In this case, he never grew out of Pokemon. That means he's 35 years old, and he still loves Pokemon. Now, maybe that's because Pokemon is now you could run a business trading Pokemon cards, or you can play games like Pokemon Go, and that's can be for adults, right? Maybe that's why. Or maybe this person just has found a reason to always love Pokemon. This could be a negative thing or not, right? It could be that you're immature and you haven't grown out of this thing that's for kids. What's wrong with you? Or it could be just a nice little thing. Oh, you still like that. That's great. So I'm not saying if this is positive or negative. It's just a way to describe that thing that started as a kid. And then we could say something, let's say this lesson, for example. This lesson grew out of, I'm just going to put this over here, grew out of a question that a student asked me about this phrasal verb. So I thought about these phrasal verbs associated with childhood and growing up because I had a conversation about this topic with someone, and it made me think, I could do a lesson about that. I could use those phrasal verbs to connect that to that topic, and that kind of grew out of that conversation. So the conversation is a smaller thing, almost like the conversation is the seed, and then this thing grows out of that seed. So when you say out of, you're saying that the source, you're talking about the source or where it came from, the idea often, or the concept of something might come out of a seed that is the inspiration for that thing, okay? Now we have one more very quickly to talk about, and that is bring up. Now, I'm sure you've heard bring up before. It's used in a lot of different ways. How is it connected to kids? I don't get it. Well, one basic meaning of bring up is to carry something from down to up, right? So here's a building, and this is the 15th floor, and somebody starts down here with a bag full of celery, and they go into the building, and they go up the elevator, and now they're on the 15th floor. They have brought the celery up. Yeah. Bring it up. Can you bring up the pizza? Thank you. Okay. So it's a physical definition. Another meaning of bring up is very similar to the word mention. Mention. To mention something is to say it for one reason or another. For example, don't bring up anything about Kevin around her. So let's say we have a mutual friend, and she was dating another mutual friend that we have named Kevin. But why do I have a G there? The heck, get rid of that. Kevin, what's wrong with me? Recently, she and Kevin had a very bad breakup, very emotional. They had been together for 4 years, and they broke up, and she's devastated. She's very upset about this, right? So we're getting together, a group of friends, and you don't know how bad this has been. Right? I'm her very close friend, okay? And you come over, and we're going to get together, and we're going to have some pizza. Bring up the pizza. And I just want to warn you, hey, don't mention this topic, please, because if you mention it, she is going to be very upset. All right? Hey, thanks for being here. Thanks for bringing the pizza. Don't bring up anything about Kevin, okay? If you do, she'll be very upset. She's recovering from this horrible breakup, so we want to avoid bringing up the topic of Kevin because that is a painful subject, a sore subject for her. And so don't say it, don't mention it, don't talk about it, don't bring it up, because otherwise she might cry. Okay? Thank you for the pizza. Another slice. Okay, so that's another common meaning. So far we haven't said anything about anything about kids or what. So what about that then? Yes, okay. This is about raising kids, children, as a parent. Now, you could talk about yourself in relation to who raised you, or you could talk about yourself as a parent who raised others. Maybe you've heard of the TV series called Raised by Wolves. Maybe you know the story Jungle Book, which is about a little boy who was thrown into the jungle, or left in the jungle, not thrown in, but left in the jungle, and actually grew up with wolves, raised by wolves. So that means that the wolves were the parents in a way. They are the ones responsible for teaching Mowgli, the kid in Jungle Book, how to hunt and how to get along with others and the law of the jungle, right? This sort of thing. So you could replace the word raised here. I raised my kids well. I raised my kid to be a good hunter. You could replace raised here with brought up. Now, brought up doesn't sound as good as a TV show name, so Raised by Wolves sounds better, right? Brought up by wolves, exactly the same meaning. So we might say something like this. I was brought up by wolves. I want to bring up my kids to be responsible adults. Does this mean I have kids? Does this mean they are adults? No. It could be that they're babies or your kids are 3 or 4 years old, or it could be you don't have any. What it means is, if and when I have kids, or with my current children, I want to make sure that they become that. So it's focusing on this process of teaching them, helping them grow up in a responsible way, giving them the right tools and knowledge to make them able to handle the world, right? And you could say who did it too. We often use bring up when we talk about who. I was brought up by wolves. Oh, okay. I was brought up by my grandparents, or I was brought up by my aunt and uncle, like Harry Potter. Harry Potter was not brought up by his parents. Why not? Because they were killed when he was a baby. So brought up is not about your physical parents. Usually people are brought up by their parents. Sometimes they're only brought up by one parent. Sometimes Harry Potter, for example, is brought up by his aunt and uncle who don't like him. So this just means that the process of teaching and educating and providing and feeding and giving clothes, that sort of thing, okay? So these are the 3 common phrases for being a kid and raising kids that I want to share. Phrasal verbs that you hear very, very often. Again, the key is really to learn them by example. The key is to make sure when you use them, you understand the context and you understand that phrasal verbs may have many different meanings. When you hear a phrasal verb in a movie, pay attention to the context, the situation that it is used in. If you pay attention to that, you practice making your own examples, you'll be more likely to use those phrasal verbs naturally. And that's going to help you expand your ability to communicate effectively. If you have any questions, just let me know.